My name is Saral. I'm an MD. I was born in Volga, Estonia. We came to America in 1949. Lived in the Middle West. Graduated from Ames High School in the Heartland in Iowa, and then went to Grinnell College, where I spent 4 years, majored in chemistry, and then went from there to Johns Hopkins Medical School. Graduated, trained in internal medicine on the Osler Medical Service, went to the NIH for 3 years where did very fundamental research on tumor viruses. Came back to Hopkins where I completed a fellowship in hematology and oncology, developed a great interest in bone marrow transplantation, became the clinical director of the bone marrow transplant program at Hopkins in the very early days. And in 1991, Charlie Hatcher and Jim Laney persuaded us to come to Emory, and I brought 3 of my younger colleagues from Hopkins, and we set up a bone marrow transplant program here in 1991. And within a period of 2 years, we were one of the largest programs in the country. And at that point, Jeff Haupt asked me to consider being director of the Emory Clinic, and that was in 1993. And from 1993 to 2004, I was CEO of the Emory Clinic. And since 2004, I've been over with my colleagues at the Winship, and we have achieved dramatic progress and now are considered a NCI designated cancer center. And I must tell you, in the latest U.S. News and World Report, we just skyrocketed up the rankings to 24, which is remarkable, considering that that was not even apparent on the radar screen when I first came here, the whole area of clinical delivery, research, and hematology oncology. Well, I first heard about the Emory Clinic when we considered, a move from Hopkins, and I did. Every academic healthcare center's structure is totally different. And when I arrived here, I learned that I would be a member of the clinic and would be eligible to be a partner if I behaved and did good work over a few-year period of time. And it's really quite unique because it's really, the clinic was structured unlike most academic healthcare centers. It was a for-profit partnership. And it was clearly a place where there was excellent clinical care. The delivery system was outstanding. But I think to a considerable extent the emphasis was on clinical productivity, which is good for patients who come here. But I think it had an impact on the academic component of Emory. And after we'd been here for a year and a half, 2 years, it became apparent that we had a flourishing clinical program. And fortunately, we had good scientists, so we were getting grants and from the NIH to do basic and applied research that would help us further marrow transplantation as the therapeutic modality for patients with a variety of different cancers. The reason I accepted the job was I felt at that point that we needed to see change in the clinic vis-a-vis the medical school, vis-a-vis the hospitals. If Emory and our program and other programs at Emory would thrive in the future. Well, the first thing I did when I became clinic director is we moved away from the for-profit partnership. I mean, the for-profit partnership meant that at the end of the bank account of the clinic had to be wiped clean every year. The money had to be spent. For the most part, it was for physician salaries, although there was a tax on our revenues that went to the medical school, which was very appropriate. But we had no reserves. And so we talked to all of the partners who were the ones who were eligible to vote about any change in structure. And we were able to convince the partners in 1994 that it would be best to convert from a for-profit to not-for-profit status. So I think that was a major change in the way the clinic had been run since its inception. And I think it was particularly important, an important step to take that that has allowed us to move forward over the years and integrate the clinic in with the hospitals into the entity called Emory Healthcare, which is now called Emory Healthcare. And actually, Charlie Hatcher started at that point. He formed something called the Emory University System of Healthcare, a long-winded name, but it was an attempt to try and integrate all the components into one fundamental system, which we have now. And of course, Fox runs that component here. Well, I initially wanted to come to Emory because the opportunities were so tremendous, and we had to fit in with the structure. And the structure was such that the clinic was the clinical delivery system. So I didn't come to Emory to work for the Emory Clinic. I came to Emory to create a program in bone marrow transplantation, which would allow us to provide the best services not only regionally but nationally and internationally. No, you kind of learn things by yourself. Every environment's different, and we kind of figured out the lay of the land pretty quickly. Well, we knew we had an outstanding group of physicians, and we had outstanding nurses in the clinic and in the hospital that we work with. So, and we had support from Hatcher and others, so we were able to set up our clinical programs fairly quickly and go from programs that did very few transplants to one that we're doing over 200 in a couple of years, which was an incredible tribute to the people I brought here to work with me. Gosh, there are a whole bunch of people. I'll tell you, I'm proud of a lot of the people that I worked with, and the mentee thing goes back a long ways. You know, I'm going emeritus status September 1, and when I look back, they're going to have a little symposium this fall, and they're going to have people that I worked with and people that I advised coming back. Here, and one of them is a member of the National Academy of Sciences and is one of the foremost researchers in oncology at the Dana-Farber in Boston. Another of my mentees is the director of the Cancer Center at Johns Hopkins. Several mentors that are at other institutions in very responsible positions. And also many of the young fellows that I've trained. And more recently, there are mentees who I think are responsible for the incredible growth of the Department of Hematology and Oncology in the Winship Cancer Center, which in an advisory role we put together the team that is in leadership positions in the Cancer Center, which has allowed us to move forward as far as we have, and the future is great there. I think we're going to do even better. Yeah, I did. Bruce Logue, I was a phenomenal man. I mean, he was still extremely, although he was retired, he was extremely active. He had a great love for the clinic. He was a dynamo. He had more energy than any human being I knew. He was a great cardiologist. He loved the place, and he gave me, in my role, very sage advice. Randolph Thrower, who was the guy, lawyer at Sullivan and Asbell, who created the clinic, the documents that set up the clinic as a for-profit entity, was a remarkable man as well. Of course, he was head of the IRS under Nixon and left when Nixon tried to pressure him to get returns to the White House. A man of incredible decency, integrity. Willis Hearst, of course, while he was a founding member, most of his time was spent at Grady. But Willis, I got to know Willis very, very well. I mean, he was a very energetic, great cardiologist. So those are the people that I knew. Many of the original founders, and there were 17, I believe, were no longer here. But those were the people I interacted with the most. And they gave great advice and a sense of how the clinic came into its own, what the rules, et cetera, some of the political issues that every institution has. Kept me well informed of those. The clinic encouraged individual entrepreneurial activity. That is, doctors who were very good at providing care in their areas. But my philosophy of how you do clinical medicine is collaborative, and it's a team effort. And what I saw here were people competing for business because of the financial incentives that accrued if you generated a large number of what we now call RVUs. In the past we'd call billings. So I felt that in a way detracted from a really team approach to patient care, which cut across all different disciplines. Now, that's not to say people weren't outstanding physicians. They were. They're great physicians. But I think as we've evolved, we've learned the importance of teamwork, not only in the clinical enterprise, but acknowledging that what we do clinically today is going to be different because of activities in basic research and translational research that make an academic center, in my belief, the preferred place for patient care anywhere in the country, whether it's Emory, whether it's Hopkins, or wherever you are. The first is to go to a not-for-profit, because by doing that, it generated a sense that you weren't totally in it for your own money. Not all the money was going to be dispensed at the end of the year. That we would try and create some reserves that could be used for appropriate recruitments, for appropriate seed packages to groups that were looking, new groups that had great promise to provide outstanding clinical care. That was a first step. The other thing I think we did in trying to look at the people that we recruited to come to Emory in the 90s from the outside. We tried to pick people who were interested in and had a vision not only on the clinical but on the academic research side as well. And I think we made some incredibly good recruits that provided leadership in the departments or in the clinic, the sections, that led to the concept that, gosh, being a lone ranger with your own secretary, your own nurse, your OR, while providing good care clinical care could be made even more seamless if you developed the critical mass approach of having a team in every area that you provide clinical care. And I think if you look today, you see that. I mean, I think you see that across the board. So I think that's one step we took. It's changing the structure somewhat, and the other approach was really recruiting people. Intellectual capital, people make the difference. So you've got to recruit good people. And we've done that very well over the years. Cultures take a long time to change. We've had a significant change in culture. I think things are better. Are they optimal? No, they're never optimal. But I think that our clinical delivery system in the clinic is better than I've ever seen it. And we have made sequential progress each year with the people that we have, the teams that we've created. And as I'm getting a little older and I have to avail myself of care at the clinic, I'm absolutely amazed how good our people are. They're terrific. The clinic was originally formed. I mean, every place is complex, and the major programs for training were at Grady, and Willis-Hurst was there. And I think with the arrival of specialty medicine, which really occurred in the 60s and 70s, you needed to create an organization that would take care of specialty needs. So when Charlie Hatcher came down here, Charlie Hatcher was the chief resident in surgery at Hopkins. He came back here. Heart surgery was in its infancy. There were things that were absolutely brand new, and it became very clear that the best way to deliver those services to citizens of Atlanta, Georgia, in the Southeast was to form an organization made up of specialists. Yes, we had general internal medicine people, but primarily these were specialists who were only taking care of patients by referral. So it was set up so that we could provide the state-of-the-art clinical care to people in this region. That's an important to recognize. I think there was a great deal of concern, and I was not here when the clinic was being formed, that somehow this would change the practice of medicine in Georgia. And there's a great deal of concern amongst the medical societies here about the development of the Emory Clinic. But it was necessary. I mean, Charlie was the only guy doing really hard. I mean, Osler Abbott was doing some, but Charlie brought a whole new dimension to heart surgery, and quickly after he came here, he developed and brought in other people who were Ellis Jones, Joe Craver, other people who were outstanding in the field, and created a critical nucleus to provide those services for people in the state. And when I became clinic director, the only way patients could get in the clinic was by doctor-to-doctor referral. They couldn't call on the phone. So it, I think, reflected an evolution of medicine in America, the formation of clinics made up of specialists. So you have the Oxner Clinic, you have the Emory Clinic, you have the Cleveland Clinic, you have the Mayo Clinic. This was not only regional, it happened all over the country. They felt that, there's always been in Atlanta this undue concern about the 500-pound elephant in the room, and that is Emory. And would we disrupt their practice patterns, take away their patients, et cetera, et cetera? It's remarkable because we've trained a lot of the physicians that go into the community. And socially, they're all very good friends. But in the 90s, when we were looking, because of dramatic changes in managed care, and we were looking at opportunities to create affiliations within Atlanta and outside of Atlanta, Charlie asked me, as part of Emory Healthcare, when I was president of Emory Healthcare, to really investigate some of these potential interactions with Piedmont and some of the other systems in town. And what I found very extraordinary, even more so than at Hopkins, where there's always, between an academic and the community, there's always a town-gown situation in medicine. I mean, that's the reality. It's there. And it was there at Hopkins, but not to the extent that it was in Atlanta. There's a great fear that somehow we were going to, by organizing, disrupt the practices of medicine in the community and throughout the state. So that's the reality of Emory's role here. I think what's happening now is, with the creation of mega systems, you're going to see a less of that moving forward. Yeah, I mean, I think that people I mean, we look at the progress we have now in medicine, but in the 1960s and 1970s, there were a number of things that were happening that were unique. And I'll just list a few. Heart surgery. I can still remember when I was a medical student at Hopkins and seeing the first heart transplant. I mean, you go in the operating room and here's a patient and there's no heart. And they bring in the heart and they sew it in. I mean, that's dramatic. I mean, Christian Bernard did that in the 60s. We were beginning to do kidney transplants. We were beginning to do very sophisticated medical procedures. My area, marrow transplantation, really started in the 1970s and took off in the late 70s when I became a young faculty member. And we still have patients who had incurable cancers in the late 1970s, early 80s who are alive today. To do that required a team of physicians, nurses, technicians who were experts in their particular own area to provide these new services. Those were services that could not be provided in the community. I mean, right now we have a lot of open heart programs. It's become a very common thing, and there are very good people all over the country, not only in academics, but in community centers, community hospitals, who do it and do it very well. That was not the case in the 60s. So you needed to have an organization, and most of the people who were doing the novel new treatments were at academic centers. And so it just made absolute sense for people to organize the physicians who were engaged in those activities into a clinic. Now, anytime you're doing those kinds of treatments, you also need good general internists. And Paul Seavey was head of internal medicine in the clinic for years. I mean, he was an extraordinary clinician and a great human being. And you have to have other specialties. But by organizing, creating that, you created the internal, the kind of dialogue that you would have here. Let me just say that what it provided for many patients was basically one-stop shopping. In the 1960s, 1970s, even today, although medicine is consolidating and physicians are no longer as independent as they were, they're being bought up by hospital systems. But I'll just relate what my neighbor said. Well, you know, when I first came here in 1991, he said, "Thank God for the Emory Clinic, because before it was formed," this is an older guy, he said, "I would have to go to 3 different doctors' offices 20 miles apart for coordinated care. We could do that in one place." Now, that was also threatening to the community, where you could go one place and see your internist, and if he found something, you could go see your nephrologist or your urologist, or have a stress test, and if you needed surgery, you could go upstairs and see the CV surgeons. So, but it was important when you create that critical mass of people that you create an organization to manage them. That's why the clinic was an absolute necessity. Now, the question is, was it the right structure? It was a structure, it worked, it brought in good people, brought in outstanding clinicians, and it served its purpose. Now, there came a time where you had to modify it, and that's what we did in the early 90s. And it's been modified even more, because you asked me, what are some of the issues I saw? The clinic was an entity, the medical school was an entity, Crawford Long, now Midtown, and Emory University Hospital were their own independent silos. Now, that's not the way things should work. They're independent silos. When I became clinic director, the dean of the medical school had no idea what the salaries were in the clinic. The president called me up one time, it was after Laney. He said, you know, I have no idea what the salaries are in the clinic. I said, well, I'll send them over to you. So it was fragmented. And what we've done over the years with a number of people's efforts, not one, not two, but a lot of people's efforts, we've created a system, which is Emory Healthcare, and which is expanding now with Johns Creek and St. Joe's. But there was real competition between the different entities. and that's gone now. But that was a weakness. Well, the good news is, if you want to know the economics of medicine, and I looked at this, I had my people look at this when I became clinic director. Peak salaries occurred in the mid-1980s. And people talk about managed care coming in the 90s. But it really started in the late 1980s. I mean, it used to be you could, if you submitted a bill for a procedure, you would get 80% of what you charged. And you see, the other thing the community resented early on, I don't know if you talked to Charlie about this, but was that when Charlie came in, because he was doing something that was unique, heart surgery. Strange, it's only 50-some, I mean, some years ago, but it was unique. And he made a charge of professional fees that everyone in the community thought was too high. Well, Charlie was only charging what everyone else who was doing that was charging all around the country. It was not unique, but they'd never experienced that. So that was also created a little fear in the medical community. Are these guys coming in, and are they going to take the market, and are they going to take all the money out of the system? That was not a primary concern, but that was an issue as well after the clinic was formed. The guy I loved was Bruce Logue, because Bruce, when he got a little bit older, he decided he couldn't run around the halls and take care of patients and make sure things work. So he picked up golf. I think he was in his late 50s, and I wasn't a golfer at that time, but I remember Bruce said, "You got to play golf. You got to play golf. You got to have something to do beside your work." So I remember just the moments with Bruce on the golf course, where he was not a great golfer, but he was determined to get his money's worth on each round, and it was hilarious. It was fun playing with him. I mean, he was just a great personality, great human being. When I got here, it was very contentious because people in the clinic were objecting to the high, what's called the dean's tax. They felt that too much of the revenue was going to, as one of my dear friends in CV referred to them, the rat doctors, who only work from 8 to 3 in the afternoon. And he didn't see the value of sending all that money over to the School of Medicine. So we worked very creatively with Jeff Haupt to try and address those concerns while at the same time recruiting those leaders in the departments that understood the importance of both the clinical and research mission. But it was very contentious, particularly, and I alluded to the fact that peak reimbursement, which obviously is reflected in individuals' salaries, occurred in the mid-1980s. And what happened in the 90s with the managed care is reimbursement for all services started to go down dramatically. And there was a concern on the part of the clinic members that, look, we're working harder than ever, but we're getting less money. This was happening nationwide. And so many of them began to question why, unlike people in the community, why were we taking a portion of our revenues and diverting those revenues to the School of Medicine? So that was a real issue at the time, and something we had to deal with. And those were very, very, at times, very, there was a lot of tension in the air, because I think most of us felt that we're only doing the kind of clinical care that we do at any time because of advances in medicine. I mean, medicine is always moving forward, is moving ahead. And what I see is when you train really good people and you send them out to the community, they may be very, very good, but they keep doing the same thing over and over again. And it's absolutely important to recognize the importance not only of education, but of research in creating a world-class clinical delivery system. So those were contentious times. We did continue to deliver the money to the university. And the good news is by bringing in some of the people we brought in, they were able to generate incredibly important research grants from the federal government and other agencies that have allowed us to be pioneers in translating the research that they created or produced into something tangible to help human beings, either in preventing disease or treating disease. And I think that's been the most rewarding thing for me, coming from Hopkins, which has a great tradition of not only excellent clinical care, but outstanding research that leads to real changes in clinical care delivery. You know, one of my friends, Malin DeLong, who preceded me by a couple of years from Hopkins, a dear friend at Hopkins, is a pioneer in the treatment of Parkinson's disease. And in fact, last year was one of only a total of 17 now, 11 the first year, 6 last year, who received a $3 million prize for his pioneering work in Parkinson's. And most of that work was done here. And you look at some of the things we've done with our Merrill program. I mean, Ned Waller and Amy Langston and others who continued are doing outstanding work there. I mean, we've got scientists in our laboratories in cancer that are looking at novel ways of treating cancer cells, exploiting differences that we didn't even know existed years ago. It's going to translate into clinical care. And it's true across the board. I mean, Tim Olson, what they're doing in ophthalmology and some of the work on macular degeneration, and I could go on and on. That was not conceivable in the old Emory Clinic. And the reason it's done because the Emory Clinic changed, leadership changed. We were able to understand the importance not only of an outstanding clinical delivery system, but the importance of creating teams, providing clinical care, translational, and basic research. And you know, it's a fabulous story. You know, and I've been part of it for 20 years. I mean, it's been great to participate in, and now watch as I have outstanding leadership in all areas. Oh yeah, oh absolutely. You know, no relationship is perfect, and health sciences are a major component of the overall university budget. I mean, this is a great university, great undergraduate school, great graduate programs. But I'll tell you where I think you don't see it as much, and I do, and that is collaboration between our departments here, which are clinical departments, the basic science departments, not only in the school, but with the Department of Chemistry in the university and other departments that are really allowing us to expand the nature of research, collaborative, cross-cutting, interdisciplinary research that we can do. We couldn't do that when I first came here. We can do that right now. And that is a major step to being a world-class institution, which I believe we are right now. You know, we created a cadre of people who were absolutely key to the development of our bone marrow transplant program, both in the outpatient department and in the hospital. And I can tell you that no center is successful without outstanding nurses. And I think that in our own way, when we came down here with our programs, we emphasized to the people, particularly in the hospital, and Don Wells, who was head of Emory Hospital at the time, worked very closely with the importance of having, getting the nurses on board. Not necessarily the administration, yes, but getting the people who were in the trenches on board. And they're vitally important. And you know what's very exciting to me is that you know, they gave me this nice little award here from the hospitals, for Emory Hospital. And we went back and did a little filming over in the Marrow unit. And you look at the nurses who were over there, they were there when I brought the program here. And they're just absolutely outstanding. Because it's important not only in the clinic, but particularly in the hospital. When you do very, very sophisticated treatments like marrow transplantation, you're there only a part of the time. The nurses are there 7/24. And if they don't have the expertise, you can't do it. So I'm the biggest fan of nursing at the Emory Clinic and at Emory University of any physician here. They're remarkable. They're great people. Oh, I think what has happened in the 23 years that I've been here now is it was good to excellent when I got here in terms of clinical care, average to below average in research, and incrementally over time we provide the best care, clinical care in the state of Georgia. We have outstanding research programs. We've organized the clinic and the hospitals into a seamless organization. And it's reflected in the trainees that are attracted to this place. We attract, our house staff are just outstanding, better than they were when I came here. Our fellows are outstanding. They get terrific jobs elsewhere. If, for example, in hematology oncology, the fellow who had received the highest award in the country, national award in the country, this is from all cancer centers all over the country, came from Emory. That was unthinkable when I first came here. So we have become the complete healthcare delivery system. And that is very rewarding to see how that has evolved over a period of 20 years. And we are great now. We can become greater in the future. Well, there's so many. I mean, I think that let me just give you a few vignettes. After I became clinic director, one of the partners called me and he said, Saral, you know, we used to have that woman over there who'd cash our checks for us every day, you know, and you got rid of that person. I said, I did. I said, yes, I did. He said, well, I hope that's not the way you're going to act if you stay clinic director. You may not stay clinic director for very long if you keep doing things like that. The reason is that there was this solo practitioner mentality, which, don't get me wrong, these are outstanding physicians, but there was no thought of the larger issues and teamwork and coordination because of the mindset of a singularly minded for-profit partnership where whatever you produced, you reap the reward. You know, I had a friend who was in ophthalmology, and I didn't mention this earlier. I said, and he was down here, and we were classmates at Hopkins in medical school, and he heard I was coming down to Emory from Hopkins, and perversely he was leaving Emory to go to Hopkins in his area. And he said, "What's the Emory Clinic like?" I asked him, "What's the Emory Clinic like?" He said, "Well, you know, when I went from Milwaukee to Hopkins, I had 2 NIH grants for funding for doing basic work, and this was in ophthalmology." He said, "My kids were young, put them in school, and all of a sudden the tuition started coming in." And he said, "I learned if I spent one more day in the OR, I could take care of those bills." And he said, after a couple of years, I had one NIH grant. And then they got into high school and got a little more expensive. And he said, I picked up another day in the OR, and then I had no NIH grants. So that culture was not conducive to collaboration and emphasized only one leg of the proverbial stool and not the other legs. So those are the stories, you know, and I'll confess, I came down here alone. My wife, my kids, my daughters were finishing high school in Baltimore, and we wanted to let them. And my wife's mother had terminal colon cancer, and so she didn't move down. And I knew I'd spend all my time down here. And I'd get up every couple weekends. But after 6 months, I called her and said, "This ain't gonna work down here." And we made it work. And that's when I realized that if this place was going to continue to go in the right direction, I'd have to accept Jeff Haupt's asking me to be clinic director, because it needed to change. This place needed to change because the model was good for its time. That's been accomplished, I believe. I'll tell you, one of the rewarding parts of being in the marrow transplant field, rewarding but also at times very, very difficult, is that you're dealing with patients who have very few treatment options left to treat their malignancy, mostly which is a blood cancer, leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma. And the successes really resonate because many of these people are young people. And when you cure them of their disease and they go on, finish their education, go to college, go to work, that is incredibly rewarding. And so I won't name, there's so many, and we're fortunate that there's so many that have gone on and done pretty incredible things with their lives, which had no future when we first saw them and went ahead with the transplant. You know, we have one woman who I transplanted for myeloma, multiple myeloma, a fatal blood cancer in 1992, and she has no myeloma today. That's 20 years later. It's unheard of. That's unheard of. And many other patients, not only from Emory, but from Hopkins. And what you learn about people is basically, you get very cynical at times, but what I've learned with patients, it cuts across all educational, socioeconomic barriers. And it's just very rewarding to have positive outcomes. Unfortunately, we're not 100% successful, but in many instances. And that's where the anguish and the pain comes in, when it doesn't work. But if it does work, it's dramatic. And people go back to a life they never envisioned they'd have. Well, I think you've got to put into context. I mean, I still believe that the intellectual capital, the engine that fuels a healthcare system, are the physicians and their associates, nurse practitioners, nurses, et cetera. They are the ones that drive the show. I think the future for us looks very bright if we continue to recruit and retain the people that we have. Recruitment is very important and key because you need to keep replenishing fresh ideas, new people into every discipline and creating the critical mass across the spectrum, excellent clinical care, translational research, and basic research. We've done that successfully and improved all across the board over 20 years. If we can continue to do that, I think the future is very bright, and I think we can do it. My parents lived in a very small country across from Finland, Estonia. My father was a lawyer. His father owned factories that manufactured linseed oil. My mother was born in the southern part of the country, and they had a number of large farms. The Second World War was very disruptive in that before Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, he signed a pact with Stalin, which meant that the Russians took over Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, other parts of that area that they'd owned previously. Because my family were capitalists, half of them were sent to sojourn in Siberia. My father and mother were able to survive until the Germans came in, and then they suffered under the Germans. And interestingly, my uncle, who's now deceased, served in both a Russian and a German prisoner of war camp. When the Russians started moving against the Germans in late 43, early 44, we left the country. And after a long migration behind enemy lines, family was outside of Dresden the night before the bombing. Fortunately, we didn't go in. We ended up in northern Germany in the British sector. My father was fluent in 6 languages, so he got a job with the British government. We were in a displaced persons camp and came to America in 1949, where my father started was sponsored by the Lutheran Church. The church was very important in helping displaced persons, regardless of whether it's Catholic, Lutheran, Methodist, etc. So he started out as a tenant farmer in Iowa, and then moved into a small business which grew a little larger and was sold to a conglomerate. I grew up, learned the language, went to public schools in Ames, went to Grinnell. My parents were remarkable people. I mean, they went through hell and were able to come to this country and succeed, and provided an environment for us that allowed us to move forward, get an education, pick an area we wanted to really excel in, and we've been very, very fortunate.